Well, welcome once again to AP's Profiles in Christian Living. My name is Mark Powell, and I have with me a special guest today, Mr. Wayne Richards, former General Manager of the Presbyterian Church of New South Wales, and now the Chairman of Scots College, Sydney. Welcome, Wayne. Great to have you with us.
Good to see you, Mark.
Now, Wayne, you've done many things in your life. I didn't realise until recently that you're actually the brother of Kel Richards, the famous radio presenter.
I'm the younger and better version. I bumped into Clive Robertson once, and I got up the courage to tap him on the shoulder and say, I know you. And when he looked at me strangely, I said, I'm Kel Richards' little brother. And he pointed and he said, yes, the younger and better looking version.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, there's so many things that I want to talk to you about today, but I've got to start by asking you, please tell us briefly, but it's no less importantly, how did you first become a Christian?
Good question. In fact, it's relevant to something I've just finished doing, and that is that when I was about eight and a half, Billy Graham, it was 1959, and Billy Graham came to town. My mother was a Christian, and I say to this day she prayed her whole family into the kingdom of heaven. But she took me and my one other brother, Graham at the time, and after the call to come forward, she said, well, aren't you going forward? And I said, well, if you want me to. So she shooed me out, and I went down and got counselled and didn't have a clue what I was doing. But what they did do is they put Scripture Union notes in my hand.
Yeah, right.
And I started reading the Bible, and God used that to convert me over the next year.
Wow.
So they're very fond memories.
And how does that relate to what you're doing now?
Well, I've just finished putting together a devotional working through the Gospel of John for my grandchildren because it was about they're at the same age now. And whilst there's a lot of very good material around, a lot of it is puzzle orientated and game orientated and entertainment orientated, and they're old enough just to read the scriptures with some notes and some encouragement day by day. So I decided to give it a go, and I've got a little thing coming out called John Unplugged.
Oh.
I was going to say by the church drummer, but I didn't put that way.
Yeah, you are a drummer as well, and not a bad one either. I've seen you. You're very good. You played in assembly and things like that.
Well, I've been playing ever since then. 10 years, so 60 years of drumming. More than 10,000 hours, I can assure you.
Wow, fantastic. Now, this really does touch on to the main thing I want to talk to you about today, and that is training young people, particularly Christian education. Now, if I can step back, because you have been the chairman of Sutherland Shire Christian School.
Now known as Shire Christian School.
Okay. You are also the current chairman of Scots College, Sydney. If I could step back and ask a bigger question first. Why a Christian education? Why? Because there'd be some people that would say that are very passionate. Some people would say, well, homeschooling's the way. Other people would want to say, no, we need to send them into public school education. Why do you think Christians need to be involved in education?
Well, they do, very much so. I think there was a time when there was a strong argument for saying, well, it didn't really matter where you sent your children to school, and of course sending them to public school, well, it's a good witness, isn't it? And this day and age, I'd say, really, how are you at their age witnessing for Christ in a community which has changed greatly? The idea of Christian education or going to a school with a Christian worldview is that place will reinforce what you're teaching your children at home. They won't be going to a place which will actually attempt to undo it. And I think that's the greatest challenge. Going to a Christian school is like cotton wooling a child from the real world. And I'd say it's the very opposite. It's actually engaging Christianly with the world, giving your children the tools they need to go on and engage Christianly with the world as they mature. We're in a time now, and this is probably another discussion, where there's a revolution going on in thinking in terms of critical theory, and that's coming through critical social justice theory and all the others, critical gender theory, critical race theory, and whatever. And it's a God-hating, family-hating, Marxist-related theory, which is coming to a school near you if it's not already there. We saw it with Safe Schools. That's the beginning of it in Australia.
Yeah.
But it's much bigger than that, and it's coming from the academic world, the tertiary institutions, which have been teaching for years about there's only two ways to look at the world, the dichotomy of whether you're the oppressor or the oppressed as such. And that's the way you must view every subject matter and how you must view all of life. And it's soul-destroying. Now, if you want to send your kid to a place that's going to do that, then I take my hat off to you. But we really need, I think, as Christians to think seriously about supporting and being part of a Christian community which is trying to equip our kids to cope with what's being said out there. And what are the answers, what are the Christian answers to that?
It's fascinating. You talk about safe schools. Now, you and I actually had a lot to do with that very issue a number of years ago now, when there was a huge furore at Burwood Girls' School over the film Gaby Baby. And I remember discovering that week with you in all the press conferences and things that we did together, this thing called the Safe Schools Coalition that had come out of La Trobe University with Ros Ward, who was an avowed Marxist. And that was, I feel like, a tipping point in our culture where we realised that there was this other worldview, antithetical to the Christian faith, that was operating. You're saying, really, you only see that becoming stronger.
Oh, absolutely. I actually see a connection back to the late 19th century with higher criticism, critical theory, textual, critical textual application, if you like, of the Bible, and how through that it actually stole the faith of many pastors and ministers. But it wasn't until the middle of the 20th century that the effect of all of that actually started to flow through, that liberal theology, weakening the faith of many Christians. Now, in the 20th century, late 20th century, we had postmodernism, and that has actually spawned, if you like, critical theory in a revived Marxist kind of way. And I think we're now seeing that rolling out and affecting our children, or coming to our children.
That's a very robust historical assessment. I wonder who your pastor might be.
I haven't discussed that with him. True.
Okay. Oh, so Reverend Dr. Peter Barnes.
He'll probably correct me historically.
He probably will too.
But I mean, what's happening is that what was happening way back then is now happening to the secular way of thinking, not just the Christian way.
So you're seeing, what you're really saying is we're seeing the fruit of it now being enacted through our institutions.
Yeah, and beyond theology. It's now the way you must think about the world in a secular sense.
Okay. Now, you have been the chairman of Shire Christian School. You're now the chairman of Scots College. I think two of the finest schools, I think, in New South Wales.
They're two good schools.
They're excellent. What are the strengths of both schools?
Hopefully they're trying to do the same thing, but because of their constituents, they're doing it slightly differently. I mean, it has been suggested that a Christian school is really predominantly working for the Christian parents and reinforcing those covenant obligations, and that a church school, if you like, is, if it's coming from a good Christian worldview, is more evangelical in terms of trying to have mission. I think that's superficial. I think the reality is that do we not try to evangelise our own children? Mm-hmm. Kids are kids. There are non-Christians in Christian schools, low-fee Christian schools, and whilst you would find yourself to be attractive as a Christian school to Christians, kids are kids, and they still need to be converted, and they still get caught smoking behind, the toilet block, and so you're still dealing with hearts that need to be changed. Now, in a higher fee school, for the want of a better word, if you have a strong Christian worldview, you're wanting to find opportunities to intentionally impart that everywhere you can. And yes, there probably will be less Christians in that school, but but that means we do the whole thing differently and make sure that there are regular opportunities to expose all boys to the gospel, but also reinforce the children, the students of Christian families, what's being taught at home for them as well.
Okay, so I've got to ask you this on a personal level, without betraying any confidences. How have you found it being the chairman of a parent-controlled Christian school to the chairman of a denominational school?
First off, it's about controlling that meeting. And it's very easy to have midnight meetings, and I refuse to. So managing the actual council or the board well, so that you're actually focused in achieving things and people know what's required of them when they come, so that you are focused on the reason that you're being, the reason you exist. And you're not distracted by a whole lot of other things which could be treated as managerial. And whilst they should be looked at and made sure that everything's happening Christianly, in the end, you do need to separate governance and management and get on with the task of guiding where it's going.
I'm really interested to drill down on this with you, because I think you are a very gifted leader. You were the general manager of the Presbyterian Church of New South Wales. You are the chairman of Scots College. Help us to think through this as, for those that are listening to this, that are in similar positions of leadership. What makes for good leadership in councils in terms of what you're talking about there with governance and management? Can you help unpack that? What are some of the key principles that you need to keep in mind?
You have to know why you're there in that position. Mm-hmm. You're leading a group of men and women to govern a body, and they've given their time, which is precious, probably at difficult times, at night times too, and they're not being paid. So they love the Lord. I'm glad to say that everyone on our council at Scots College is a strong evangelical Christian. Mm-hmm. And so we need to respect what they're coming for. So you have to give them meaning as to what they're doing too. They're not there just to do some boring administration. Now, there is some boring compliance administration which we're accountable for and must make sure is happening. But you do pay people to do that, and so you make sure that they're doing it. We're there for the bigger purpose of making sure that the strategy has been expressed correctly and it's being applied correctly, and particularly in honour of our owners, the Presbyterian Church, and the whole purpose as to why we exist. Mm-hmm. And so, and it's not forced. Delightfully, because we're of like mind as a council, the issues of how we actually advance the gospel in the school in different opportunities and ways intentionally is something which comes up naturally all the time. And we're blessed with a Christian leader, principal, who is intentional about what he's trying to do in employing Christian teachers and making sure that the Christian worldview is in fact expressed in all the right places and that the kids hear the gospel. And so I guess to try and answer that question simply, be sure why you know why you're there. I think every good leader has a clock ticking in their head. They have a sense of wasted time. When I did my MBA, I had a little personal motto where I said management is about providing meaning in the context of service whilst avoiding all the distractions. And people are only motivated by meaning. And so you've got to keep coming back to that. That's how you motivate people. Make sure that we all agree the reason and purpose why we're doing something. And we're doing it obviously because we love God, and we're doing it as a service because we're meant to love our neighbour. But there'll be 1 million distractions that will stop you from doing that. And you've got to realise when the distraction is a distraction that's not from God, it's actually from the world or from something else, and you are now wasting your time and everybody else's time. So efficiency and effectiveness does come from being aware of that clock, if you like, that's ticking in your head. You've only got so many minutes, so many hours to actually achieve some very, very important things.
When you became general manager, I think it was early 2000s, wasn't it?
2001?
Yeah.
Two.
Yeah. It was at a pretty critical time in the Presbyterian Church of New South Wales. There's a lot going on in that time. I just recently interviewed Mr. Jeff Falls, who's now taken your job. And
he liked it so much, he was looking for chairman. He said, I'd like to do that.
That's right. That's right. But before that, while you were general manager, he was chairman of trustees, and we talked about it being a very tumultuous time. How do you think the denomination has changed from the early 2000s till the end of your tenure?
That's. I'm not sure I have an authoritative answer to that.
No, just your observation or perceptions.
But certainly it's been encouraging and positive in many ways. I think from the general office point of view, people were pleased to have someone who was actually on the same page as them, and that was all the new trustees that came on, Jeff, and they appointed me as general manager. I guess fundamentally we needed to make sure that it wasn't a financial risk and burden to the church. When I got there, we had about 2 weeks of cash left to pay the staff.
Wow!
So that opened the eye pupils and focused the mind. So God was good and blessed a lot of things that we did. Then how could we then be proactive in helping the denomination do things and be responsive to that? So I guess whilst we achieved a number of things in terms of financial matters, the key thing for me would be how the denomination has developed spiritually in terms of what it's doing. I think...
And what's your observation there?
Well, I think I've noticed that the word Presbyterianism or Presbyterians is better known and more respected around the place than perhaps it used to be. Now, I don't know who's brought that about, but I think over time, again, it might come back to being clearer about what we're about as a denomination, coming out of union, being clearer about what God blesses in terms of our Reformed doctrine and doctrines of grace. And I've had the pleasure of seeing some very good young men come through the college.
Okay.
And do some very exciting things. I think our challenge, and we bring some unique things about what worship means, what a confessional church means, and I think we've seen the fruit of that, which more so perhaps than in previous years.
The other thing I failed to mention before is that you haven't just been chairman and general manager, but you're also an elder in the Presbyterian Church, and so you're also very active in the Sydney South Presbytery. What do you think is the importance of a healthy, functioning presbytery to the good of our denomination?
I think it's critical. It amazes me over the last few years the number of very important things presbyteries have had to deal with, or our presbytery for that matter.
Okay, so without it breaking any confidentiality.
Sure.
Do you want to?
Oh, just ministers who stumble, and that's got to be resolved in a biblical manner for them and their congregation. Congregations that get into financial difficulty. I guess there are positive opportunities as well, but there are things that I think, as a teenager I was a Baptist. Baptists don't have such things. Where do they turn for help? You don't go to head office for help necessarily. So presbytery can be a really healthy peer group of supporting one another, holding one another up in prayer and in practical ways that other denominations just don't enjoy.
And what do you think, though, are the challenges for us as a presbytery? I really see you as one of the older statesmen in the church, for better, for worse, right? I think much for better. But what do you, if you were to say to younger elders coming through, and younger men or women that are looking to serve on the committees of the church, right? What would be a word of exhortation or advice you might give them?
Well, not to be afraid to call out the hard things. I think what we don't want it to be, committees and presbyteries shouldn't just be friendly little clubs that we like going to meetings for. I mean, who likes going to meetings? They're meant to actually achieve things that are worthwhile, to take things forward proactively. But also when you see an issue, there's the challenge or the risk of not wanting to raise it or deal with it properly because we're loving and we're Christian and we don't want to hurt one another. So doing that in a way that is loving and doesn't hurt one another, and calling it out and helping, I think is critical. Otherwise, why are you on the committee? I mean, going back to Scott's, we've got all good people on the council, but it's wonderful the way that they actually challenge one another and each other and pull us up on a regular basis. And so you're there to do that.
So there's an old joke, how many Presbyterians does it take to change a light bulb? Well, only one to change a light bulb, but 9 to form a committee.
Yes.
And there are some people that roll their eyes going, not another committee. You've been very involved in committee work. Why would you encourage people that might be listening to this, that are presented with the opportunity to be on a committee? What would be your word of advice or encouragement to why they should or maybe even should not join? What do they need to bear in mind before they say, I do to that commitment?
Just go do it for the right reasons. Don't do it because you think, I'd like an activity. I'd like to fill up some of my time. I like chatting. The number of times I've actually stop our meeting and say, ladies and gentlemen, we're chatting. Let's get back to business.
Interesting.
So you're not there for the fellowship. You're there for other reasons. I mean, we go to other places for fellowship, and there is fellowship, and that's natural. That'll always happen. But they're not the reasons you're going. The reasons you're going is to get something done, and
to keep that at the forefront of your mind.
And keep focused and encourage your management and your CEO that you're part of a committee of in the right directions. I mean, the biggest jobs are indeed finding replacements for the head of an organisation. That's absolutely critical, and making sure that you stay on track.
Now, if I can just change track a bit, I haven't given you any warning about this, but to talk about something on a personal level. You're a husband, right? How many years have you been married now?
47. I hope I get that right.
Oh, wow. 47, coming up to the big 50.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic. Congratulations. But you're also a father. What have been now? A lot of people would be aware of, I guess, of your family dynamics. Do you want to just maybe share some of the opportunities, blessings, and challenges that you've experienced as a husband and father?
And failings? Well, I've got 2 daughters, 48. 40, she's got to be a year younger than the marriage.
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe this is our 48th year, and she's 40, coming up to 47.
Yeah, okay. Get that number right.
She's the eldest daughter, and she's intellectually disabled.
Okay.
So we'll never be empty nesters. We're 3. We're always 3, never 2. We've overcapitalised the house, and she lives upstairs, but she doesn't cook or anything, so she comes and has all the meals with us. And she goes to a sheltered workshop, which they used to be called. They're not called that now, of course. Yeah. And so that's good for her. So she has a good, robust life, as independent as it possibly can. COVID's made it less independent. Hopefully she'll get back to travelling on her own and doing things that she really loves doing.
How has that shaped you as a Christian man, that responsibility?
You have to ask others, and maybe my wife, because, and I know you're in not a dissimilar situation, but you constantly feel a failure because no one gave you the rule book for being a parent, let alone a parent of a child with special needs. And often the needs are unique. There's no other one that you can actually look to, and it's not like a defined condition, if you like. And so whilst you can only guess as to what to expect, you're really learning on the go. So you just need to depend on God prayerfully. And then there's milestones where you realise that your grandchildren very quickly intellectually went ahead of your eldest daughter. And you didn't expect that. And because she was our first child, we had nothing to compare her to. And then we had a second daughter, Marcia, who is a teacher in a Christian school in Canberra with 2 little girls. And she is a great encouragement. And it's probably had a bigger impact on her as sister. And she asked one day, Dad, sometimes I feel like the big sister. And she must have asked that when she might have been 10 or 11. And I just said, you became the big sister a couple of years ago. So we've got 2 different girls who have different kinds of needs, and we still delight in attempting to satisfy those needs. But Chrissy has a real faith, which is really encouraging.
Well, that's where I wanted to go, and I'm glad you mentioned that. If I can just press a little bit on that, because we've talked about this in other contexts about people with disability and faith. How have you seen that expressed and nurtured in your parenting?
Well, the first thing I'd say, and my wife has been fabulous in this regard, is that if you stop and think about how you process things intellectually, we absorb, I would argue, 10 times. We're able to hear and understand 10 times that which we're able to express. When we have to articulate things, the brain has to go into gear, we have to work at it, and we stumble around. But when we don't, and we're just sponges, you can absorb. So what I'm saying is you don't judge what a person with a disability, particularly an intellectual disability, can understand by what you're seeing in terms of how capable they are to communicate back to you. Make the assumption that they can actually hear and understand a lot more than you're getting feedback from.
And what's the role?
So you don't talk down to them.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
And you don't baby everything.
Yeah.
Okay. You do it prayerfully. You do it intelligently, but we talk fairly normally in front
because they're still sinful people too, aren't they?
Well, that's right. Oh yeah. And so you can talk to them about more things to do with the Christian faith and life than you realise. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, right. Even though they may not be able to verbally respond back.
Yeah.
Just a couple more final questions. One on this. How important and what is the place of the local church in this regard? People with disabilities, supporting families. What have you seen has been the blessing in your own life?
Absolutely. It's Chrissy's extended family. Because she works in an operation where she has an annual review, like everybody has an annual review, and with the NDIS, they ask all these personal questions about what you do and what you like doing, and Christine always mentions her church and what she likes about the church and people at the church. So it's vital for her, and she feels part of a large community because of that, and I think she feels accepted and safe, which is very critical.
Now, one final question. You first sort of prompted to faith at the 59 Billy Graham Crusade. You said you're about 8 or 9. So I'm doing the math and, right. So, you're in that final season of life. Words of encouragement. What would you say to people that are retired, in inverted commas, from their professional working life? They're in this season where you are now. What are the opportunities and challenges?
Well,
because you're doing still a lot.
I've never been a big 5-year planner. You must plan your life out for the next 5 years and make sure you're achieving all those goals.
That's a shame, because I was going to ask what's happening at Scott's.
Oh, we are for the Scots.
Yeah.
Not for me personally.
Okay.
And I say that simply to say that believing in the sovereignty of God and the providence of God, He's the one who opens doors, and you've got to be open to that and be ready to walk through them, etc. And that's largely how things have happened for me. And I think being ready to respond to the right opportunities that people put before you. I'm not saying you shouldn't be proactive and knock on doors yourself, but I've never been one of those sort of people saying,
there's the providence of God.
Yeah.
But what providential opportunities are there for our older Australians. I mean, many would just go, there's a worldly dream of being a grey nomad, right? What ministry opportunities are there?
Well, I was reading some Spurgeon recently, and,
Okay.
and he reminded me about how good and wise it is. How does the saying going? To die with your boots on? In harness, to die in harness.
Okay.
And that was challenging because I had a neighbour once who confessed to me, a lovely Christian man, and he said to me, Wayne, my problem is that I'm fundamentally lazy. And he never was, okay? He was a very busy and competent person. But he felt that heart sin, and I think I have that as well. I'd love just to put my feet up and read a book. Happy as Larry to do that. So the best things that you end up doing are the ones that you do under pressure. That's how I find.
Interesting.
Pressure brings the best out of me. If I'm left to myself, I probably won't do it. So God has steered me and pushed me in certain directions because He's wanted to use me, and I'm grateful and humbled and hopefully been effective for His glory in that process. So should you go out looking for stuff? Yes, life is not just playing golf when you retire, but doing the small things that aren't noticed, perhaps, with individuals, one-on-one.
Yeah.
That's just as important because you've got a lifetime of Christian experience, and you've probably experienced or been through what they're going through. And so you can be of some help to others.
Excellent.
Don't waste that.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. It's been great having you with us. And you are doing an incredible amount, but it's great to hear you saying too about how we need to be faithful in the little things.
Yeah.
And I think it was Schaefer that once said, there are no little people or little places. And the Lord Jesus says, if we're faithful with a little, then we'll be faithful with a lot.
It's true.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so
Mark.
much. Thank you.
My pleasure.
This has been another edition of AP's Profiles for Christian Living, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks again.